everyone, and welcome to The X, a podcast from inside Silicon Valley about how experience shapes everything from products to businesses to entire industries. I'm Brian McLean, and I'm here with Demetrius Madrigal. Today, we're going to look back at the last year since we started the podcast and talk about our favorite shows, guests, and predictions, some that we got right and some that we got wrong. Good morning, D. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, man. It's crazy to me that it's been a year. It went by so fast.
I can't believe it. I mean, I remember when we first started thinking about doing the podcast and we're like, oh, okay, let's think about what kind of shows that we would have and like, what would people be interested in? And then like learning the software, learning the flow, learning the editing, practicing. I think we did 6 or 8 episodes that never got published, that we just tested and tested and tested just to kind of see how we would communicate with each other.
Oh yeah. We recorded that first one quite a while. We just had to find a groove. You have to kind of get into a groove and get comfortable with just being on a microphone. That's just part of it.
I agree with that. And also the time when we first started using some of these software packages, and I'll tell you about them. Like we use Zencaster for recording, which is a great piece of software. When we first started using it, it didn't even offer video. So we couldn't see one another. Now we end up using video for our guests because we want to be able to kind of see their expressions and kind of respond to that. But Demetrius and I actually found that when communicating with just one another, we like just using audio. It helps us think more clearly about data and predictions and things like that because we can bring up on our screen different pieces of information that we've researched and brought up prior to starting the podcast. All right, so D, I thought it'd be fun today to take a walk down memory lane and talk about our shows, our guests, our predictions. Does that sound good?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see what the past has held for us.
Okay, all right. Question number 1: what is your most memorable moment on the podcast over the last year?
The one that stands out for me is when we were doing the space podcast, and I was being pretty skeptical of it because I think it's not there yet. Space is a very serious business. It's not the kind of thing that you turn into a Disneyland trip. And you were more positive on it, or trying to be neutral about it, and you were talking about the water landing that occurs, splashdown, and they were describing it in such positive, like happy terms, and you had such a hard time just keeping the laughter down because they were saying these things, and I know in the back of your head you're thinking about like, this is an impact into the ocean from space. This is not like a feather touch landing you sleep through.
Well, there's nothing I love more than the creative words of marketers, because when you say something like, the rocket will fly, up into suborbital Earth, and the crew will float around and enjoy the views of Earth, and then they will slowly descend back to Earth in a water landing, and you're like, or a slow descent into the desert. I keep thinking to myself, you mean like a treacherous, violent return to Earth that we use all available technology to slow down so that you don't bang into the Earth really hard? You know what I mean? Like in my mind, I was thinking of, the way we would land, back in the 70s and, 60s and 70s, right? Not like what actually happened with Bezos's flight. I mean, they landed pretty softly in the desert, but it's just so much stuff was running through my mind when I was hearing that, and it just made me laugh so hard that I could barely keep it together during that podcast.
Yeah, and it very much reminded me of that old George Carlin bit where they were talking about like the airline language of like, yeah, we'll be making a water landing, and he was like, that sounds suspiciously like crashing into the ocean.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I was waiting for them to add in like a bit about like, oh yeah, and we're pretty sure our team will be able to recover your splash capsule before you sink to the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah, it's a tough business. I mean, there is no doubt about it. I'm a little more neutral on it because I hope that the technology kind of gives us some great opportunities for long haul flights and things in the future. But definitely the whole tourism aspect of it worries me. It seems dangerous. I know technology is better than it was before, but like it's just it only takes one accident to kind of tank the whole thing. And so I'm very neutral on it, and I just wish everyone the best of luck with it.
It's just not I think it's great when we finally do get there. I'm just not sure that we're there now. But putting that aside, what was your most memorable moment on the podcast?
I was thinking about this while you were talking, like something popped into my mind, and because I was thinking about a couple episodes we did, and then I realized what was really memorable was talking to Ben Fit in Hawaii, because he was in the mountains of Kauai. It doesn't have the best internet connection. He even told me that, like, isn't the strongest internet connection, and he totally made it work. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I am talking to somebody who's in the mountains of Kauai about how he produces and brews coffee, and I get to share this with the world. And I was like, this is awesome. Like, how awesome is this, right? And sometimes I think when you land a guest like that, um, that is so unique and interesting, it just kind of changes your perspective. There's this kind of old saying that, like, the best way to kind of expand your mind and change and expand your worldview is to just travel, right? Is to just go see the world, how other people live, be empathetic of different situations. I felt like I was getting that just from the podcast with Ben. And I've been to Hawaii many times. I've not been to Kauai, but like just to hear him talk about like being out in the fields and like, preparing a cup of coffee for, a patron and that kind of stuff. And you're like, wow, like your life is so different than mine. And it sounds so amazing. So that was one of my most memorable moments.
Yeah, absolutely. There is something just kind of magical about where we are today technologically, where we can connect with people thousands of miles away, or other side of the world in different countries, and have meaningful conversations with them. It's a privilege that we absolutely cannot overlook.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so with that, in that same vein, there, who was your favorite guest and why? And I know we loved all of our guests because we handpicked them, but like, which one really kind of stuck out for you, D?
My favorite was Adam Dole, and that's for a few reasons. Adam's a good friend of ours, going back quite a while. There's also I find Adam is a very positive person, where he brings like the type of positivity where even if there is negativity there, he somehow finds a way in order to find the positivity within it, and not in a patronizing way, in a very meaningful way. There's also the fact that the work that he's doing is so important and so valuable, and has so much potential to impact society in general in ways that we can't even predict, because it's so fundamental that it's one of those problems where as you improve it, it can have just reverberations throughout society to affect everything.
Yeah. I remember when we finished up that podcast, I loved it as well. I mean, it was fantastic. I think it was one of our longest interviews. And I remember finishing it and walking away and thinking, Adam must sleep really good at night knowing that his hard work is literally feeding people, like
Yeah.
literally people who don't have the means in order to eat a meal or feed their family. And Adam's job is to solve that problem, right? He must sleep really comfortably at night and be very proud of himself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that if anybody out there who's listening to this and hasn't caught that podcast, I absolutely highly recommend you go back and listen to it. Adam is working on a project called Bento, where he's working out ways in order to get food and meals to people who are food insecure. And there's so much data that he has, and there's also just out there for anybody who wants to look, showing how situations improve for individuals, for families, for communities, when people don't have to worry about where their next meal is coming from, and they can devote more energy to things like going out and getting a job or improving their economic situation in other ways.
Absolutely.
That said, how about your favorite guest?
Well, God, I really loved all of our guests, and we picked guests that were so different. We had Phil Wagner, the patent agent. We had, like I said, Ben Fit, who, produces coffee in Hawaii. We had Adam Dole at Bento. We had Bettina Warburg, who is like a blockchain expert. We had Ray Mueller, the former mayor of Menlo Park. I mean, just such interesting guests. I think the one that really stands out. Oh, and then Justin Graham from Hawaii, who is the videographer for Jamie O'Brien, the professional surfer. I think that particular one stood out as being one of my favorite guests because Justin is a really interesting person. He has a very interesting job. I'm also very interested in water sports and enjoy them as well. And so to kind of hear what it's like to be the videographer for a professional surfer, but also working on Hollywood films and traveling the world and having to know everything about your equipment. I mean, you got to be 3 steps ahead of everyone else to understand, what is the next great shot, and how are you going to do it? How are you going to produce it? To do it all from Hawaii, a place that I absolutely love. I was so sucked into that episode. Like I don't even remember like what I was asking Justin. I just felt like we were just friends interacting. You know what I mean during that interview, and
Yeah.
it was just fantastic. It was so much fun.
Well, Justin has such an amazing story for someone his age to be a camera operator on a major production like that. Like some of the things that he's worked on, it doesn't happen, and he acknowledged that, and he to some extent was just in the right place at the right time with the right skills. Just chance favors the prepared mind.
Absolutely. Who would you say is your dream guest? So, we can't get
Oh,
everybody. We've tried to get certain people and they haven't written back and things like that, which is totally understandable. Like, you know what I mean? People are very busy, especially when they're on the circuit and stuff like that with interviews. But like if you can just snap your fingers and have anyone come on next week and chat with them, who'd it be?
oh, that's a great question. I mean, I am personally very interested in what is going on with YouTube
Uh-huh.
right now. We've had like some lists of people that we wanted to reach out to, but it's just we're so busy that it's hard to get all the communication out. But I would love to get someone who is a YouTuber who's had to deal with some of the downsides of YouTube, such as like being demonetized or getting just copyright strikes or dealing with the algorithm in ways, and kind of get their perspective on kind of the advantages and disadvantages that YouTube provides, because uh, YouTube provides this amazing platform where people can have entire careers, create entire channels, become celebrities, or very wealthy, or just have a life where they're supporting themselves playing video games and creating content. But there is absolutely the case that it's not a perfect platform, and there's need for improvement.
Yeah, that would be a really interesting interview. Um, who specifically though would you say that you would want?
Well, there is one that stood out for me. There's a YouTuber named Impulse. He just hit 1 million subscribers. He's a Minecraft YouTuber who's done some very interesting series, like the Third Life series, the Hermitcraft series. He has another one called Naked and Scared, which is basically a takeoff of Naked and Afraid. And that whole series almost got removed recently, and they had to have a petition after, like a user petition to YouTube to say, hey, actually watch an interview or watch one of these episodes and recognize that it's not pornography just because the word naked is in the title. So I'd really love to hear the story of how that happened, as well as how these guys kind of like get their ideas for content,
Uh-huh.
because I believe the Hermitcraft series is getting more viewership on a weekly basis than like the Tonight Show.
Yeah, that would be a super interesting interview. I mean, maybe we can do that sometime.
Yeah, well, if any of our listeners are out there and you're familiar with Impulse SV on YouTube, give him a little nudge that we'll be reaching out to him.
That's awesome. Yeah, we'll give that a shot. So
How
I
about
was
you? What was your dream guest?
Yeah, I have a lot of them just like you do. And you and I have these regular conversations where we're like, okay, who do we want to invite on? And how does that kind of enhance what we're trying to do with the podcast and things like that? One of the people that we reached out to that we didn't hear back, which is totally fine, it happens all the time, which is Franklin Leonard, the founder of The
Hmm.
Blacklist.
Yes.
He produced this yearly publication highlighting Hollywood's most popular unproduced screenplays. And he started this list basically trying to find out using data analysis, kind of like us, what scripts are out there are really exciting, but for some reason they're not being produced. And as he started publishing this information, suddenly those scripts started to get picked up and those movies started getting produced. And a lot of those movies ended up winning Oscars. It's a super interesting story. And I want to hear Franklin's story, but I also really want to understand how he uses basic data analysis to understand, what is available out there that isn't being looked at properly and how that has shaped the movie industry. I think it'd be super fascinating conversation.
Yeah, it's if for anybody who's not familiar with the Blacklist, it is a hugely influential list that's been coming out for quite a while. Like you're seeing movies come out like The Blood Diamond or the remake of 310 to Yuma or The Road, which the original book made won a Pulitzer Prize, or The Revenant, which I believe was at least nominated for an Oscar. These are big name movies that ended up on the blacklist, and most people believe that their presence on the blacklist helped them to get made and become very successful.
Yeah, it's a super fascinating story and it has a lot of components to it. And I'd love to hear him kind of explain all that to us. And I'd love to pick his brain about where things are going now. Cause like we've done an episode on AI and how it's kind of tied into Hollywood now. And Hollywood's really trying to use artificial intelligence for things like script reading and other aspects. And I would love to get his take on where he thinks that's going and whether or not that's going to affect the work that he's doing.
Yeah, that would be
Um,
fascinating. I would love to talk to him.
yeah, that would be great. So if anyone knows him out there, send him our way. The X Podcast One on Twitter. And so let's talk a little bit about our predictions, the ones we got correct, the ones we got incorrect. So what were some of the predictions that we got correct over the last year?
Well, one that really stands out for me because it was essentially our first prediction was that Disney in the streaming wars, Disney Plus was going to really take off. And we made this when Disney Plus was still really new and people expected it to do well. But I don't. We were predicting that the growth of Disney's growth during that period was going to be greater than Netflix, and that it was going to be catching up with Netflix quite quickly. And it has done that. It's really kind of blown expectations out of the water. And I'm sure that the pandemic has something to do with that. But at the same time, it's also the library of content that they had going in and forming and launching, and also just the new stuff that they've been able to produce, including the Mandalorian and WandaVision and all the other content associated with Star Wars and many of the other franchises they had. I think they are set up for success. I think they can continue to have that. I think they're gonna be catching up with Netflix faster than even we anticipated.
Yeah, that was a big one for us. And we didn't just pull that out of our hat. You know what I mean? Like you and I did a lot of data analysis and really kind of looked at the market and everything and looked at what they were producing, what was coming down the pipeline, what people love, what they don't, what goes in the movies and tends to do really what shows up. I mean, in the movie theaters and does really, really well, and what doesn't, and then kind of like laying it all out. We're like, yeah, they're gonna catch up, and they're gonna do really well. And people had reached out to me afterwards and was like, oh man, I should have listened to you and bought stock in their company and stuff like that. But that was a good one. I think we talked about NFTs and we said
Mm-hmm.
that if there's anything associated with cryptocurrencies, blockchain technology, and that whole segment, that NFTs would stick, and they seem to be sticking. I mean, you start to see more and more gaming companies and art houses and things like that really sinking into this whole like digital ownership and digital
Mm-hmm.
rights management and things like that. And it seems to be moving along. It didn't really disappear like some people predicted last year, that it would just be this little pop and then we wouldn't hear about it again. So I mean, there was a couple of things I think we got right, and I think all of it was attributed to just doing our research and maybe a little bit of luck in there as well. But there are also some things we got wrong, and I want to talk about those as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
I think the one thing, D, that we were wrong about was the price of Bitcoin. I think we thought that Bitcoin would probably drop, quite a bit last year because it was popping, and it didn't. It's holding strong. It's still going.
Well, I mean, if you remember what we said specifically, at least what I remember what I said was that I anticipate that Bitcoin is going to be overtaken and replaced by a newer generation of cryptocurrency.
Correct.
While Bitcoin hasn't gone away, I still believe that that is going to happen. I think it's a question of time, and I'm basing this on looking at the capabilities of the individual blockchain, the needs of proof of work, and how proof of stake and proof of time and space are coming forward in order to alleviate the energy needs associated with proof of work. I still think it's going to happen, and but one thing I haven't. I think that we didn't necessarily take into account is just the brand strength that Bitcoin has been able to establish by being kind of the first.
Yeah. And some of our predictions are pretty far out too. So we may not have, a good insight into how they unfold, for another couple of years. Like we talked about education and we definitely said like, hey, like this is a big moment in education because with teleeducation, remote learning, so many platforms are getting like upgraded and streamlined and all that kind of stuff and it worked, but the one thing that kind of didn't work was the pushback from parents. A lot of people just felt like it was a really really tough thing to manage and handle, and teachers had to kind of step up their tech game a little bit in some areas and it was really rough. But the one thing I would say about that prediction is that uh, we talked about it in the longer term. So like in 5, 6, 7 years, when you look back, you'll realize how far that technology has progressed. So, it'll probably continue to get better and better to the point where if we have another pandemic spike or something like that, kids can like exit out of the classroom and seamlessly move to remote and then seamlessly move from remote back into the classroom when necessary instead of this crazy like March time frame of 2020 when suddenly everyone was at home and nobody had the proper equipment and everyone had to go and scramble all the school districts and kind of like set up Google Classroom and things like that.
Yeah,
I think all that stuff is going to smooth itself out and it's going to be part of it. And I think one of your predictions, actually, and correct me if I'm wrong, was that you think it's going to be an integrated model in the future.
yeah, I do, and I think one of the things that we learned is that remote education is not the kind of thing that you can just turn to immediately in a time of need, and it's just going to work, just going to work, and it's going to work great. It's the kind of thing where it takes kind of deep, thoughtful, kind of visionary design to figure out how to organize and structure and create educational content that it's really going to work for people. I think that when it happened, when the pandemic kind of threw the wrench in the education system, and we had a bunch of, or my majority of teachers our age and older who are not experienced content creators, they're teachers, now have to move to this model where they also have to essentially be a content creator, and they have to have this, they have to basically become expert YouTube creators on top of having the interaction between themselves and the students. It's just too much too fast. But I do think that over time, as like people grow into this role and they get used to the medium and all these other kinds of things, that it will be a tool in the toolbox on a permanent level.
Absolutely. The final prediction I wanted to talk about that we discussed in length and both were very passionate about, which was how e commerce has basically really, really disrupted the retail market. And one of the things that we both agreed on was curbside pickup was going to continue and it was going to do great. As of today, it is. I mean, it's if I remember right, and I could be wrong, but I think at the last earnings report for Target, they actually talked about curbside pickup as one of
Yeah.
their leading, indicators of success. Right? Is that it's growing and more people are using it and is a successful model. And that's one of the things you and I were very much bullish on, which is that the model is going to change and it's going to be both e-commerce plus curbside pickup plus maybe a smaller footprint, but some in-store operations as we move forward post this pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, I love curbside pickup. I think it alleviates some of the things that really annoy me sometimes about retail shopping. Of
Exactly.
going in and seeking out this thing amongst all this inventory, and just being able to have a way to to have that inventory searchable and sortable, and I find exactly what I want and pick it out, and somebody who is more capable than me at finding something on the shelf can just go get it and have it ready for me to pick up. It's from a UX perspective, it's absolutely a no brainer. I think that from a business perspective, there are ways to do it where you can considerably reduce your operating costs as a business,
Hmm.
and from a consumer perspective, it's can become so much more convenient. So I'm happy to see that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. So, also, too, I want to talk a little bit about what we could do better. As we think about season five, because right now we're in season four and we're going to run season four and till the end of the year, probably. And then season five will start in 2022. What do you think we could do better? And should we change things up? I know this is something that you and I have talked about. And, we've been kind of polling our guests, not our guests, our listeners a little bit by talking to them anecdotally. But what are your thoughts?
Well, I think one of the things that we have been doing is a lot of deep dives into topic areas, and I think that's great. But at the same time, we're missing out on talking about things that are meaningful as they come up. So I think one of the things we can do is start doing more stuff like the election podcast that we did, where we're talking about things that are a little bit more immediately topical, and how our knowledge and information from a background of years of doing research into some of these areas kind of informs our opinions in response to things that are happening in the news.
Yeah, one of the things that you and I discussed was changing our format starting in 2022 and actually being a little bit more reactionary to what's going on in the tech and business area on a weekly basis. So, for our listeners, this is what Dee and I are thinking about and proposing for season five is that each week we would discuss things that are going on in the industry and instead of deep diving in just one thing. And that would give everyone the opportunity to listen to us more like almost like a weekly news kind of analysis, but being done from the perspective of being UX researchers and thinkers in this space in the way that we work. We think this might work better for everybody, and it might be more fun because we're talking about topics that are literally happening in the moment. So this is something that we've been kind of noodling on, and we hope to have worked out before the end of the year.
Yeah, I think it would if we were to go that route, and I think it makes sense for us to do it from time to time, if even if a weekly thing doesn't work out. But we would definitely still want to bring in actual data and research and other information that informs our opinions rather than just stating opinion for opinion's sake.
Yeah, and also our guests. So when we do have the opportunity to bring a guest in and they have time to come in and chat, we can chat with them about things that are happening in the moment, and not have to have them, kind of prep as much for, kind of a bigger conversation around a bigger topic. And I think that might be kind of fun for them as well. So I think this was fun today, Dia. It was good to look back on it. It has been an amazing year. It's been super fun doing this with you. And I think we've learned a lot both about one another, but also how to communicate with our listeners and the people who really love to hear about what we're up to and what we're doing. Do you want to say any final words on this episode before we move on to closing out today and going back to our normal episodes next week?
Well, I think it's been a very edifying experience for us, at least for me personally, where we have done a lot of work with creators and understanding their process and how they work and what their demands are, and kind of hearing from them what the experience feels like. But there's no replacement for trying it yourself and seeing that experience for yourself, what it's like in order to put together an outline or a script and work through the editing process and feel all of that for yourself. And I think that has been probably the biggest learning experience for me, and has really helped me when I look at kind of the user experience for creators and how we can better serve them.
Absolutely. All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to listen to us today. We really appreciate it. We'll be posting our links to any of the sources that we referenced today. Probably not too many today since we were just taking a look back. But you can always follow us on Twitter at the X Podcast One. That's the X Podcast number 1. If you like this podcast, found it interesting or informative, it helps us a ton if you subscribe or leave a review on whatever platform you use. Thanks, everyone, again, and we will see you all with our regular programming next week. Take care.